The Subcommittee on Research and Science Education will come to order. Good morning. Welcome to today's hearing entitled Social, Behavioral, and Economic Science Research, Oversight of the Need for Federal Investment and Priorities for Funding. In front of you are packets containing the written testimony, biographies, and truth and testimony disclosures for today's witness panel. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Good morning and welcome to all of our witnesses. Today's hearing presents us with an opportunity to better understand the research being conducted in the social, behavioral, and economic sciences and to take a closer look at the federal funding of such research. The social, behavioral, and economic sciences are those that focus on human behavior and interaction. Often termed the soft sciences to distinguish them from the physical and life sciences, these sciences run the gamut from geography and sociology to linguistics and political science. In fact, we have 4 different disciplines represented at the witness table today: history, psychology, anthropology, and economics. The federal government invests in social, behavioral, and economic sciences through several agencies in order to better understand issues such as how children learn, how soldiers think, and how humans react to disease. The National Science Foundation, whose oversight falls within the jurisdiction of this subcommittee, is the largest federal supporter of the social, behavioral, and economic science research, funding close to 60% of basic research for these sciences at academic institutions. It is my understanding that in several disciplines it is either the predominant or exclusive source of federal basic research support. The goal of this hearing is not to question whether the social, behavioral, and economic sciences produce interesting and sound research, as I believe we can all agree that they do. Rather, the goal of our hearing is to look at the need for federal investments in these disciplines, how we determine what these needs are in the context of national priorities, and how we prioritize funding for these needs, and not only within the social science disciplines, but also within all science disciplines, particularly when federal research dollars are scarce. As with all the hearings I have chaired or co-chaired this Congress, I am particularly interested in understanding the NSF investments in these sciences, including the amounts asked for in the FY 2012 budget request and how those priorities were made. In an effort to be responsive to the American taxpayer, Congress needs to ensure that all federal funding decisions are wise and produce significant value for this nation. I look forward to a healthy discussion with all of our esteemed witnesses today, and I thank you for joining us. The Chair now recognizes Mr. Lipinski from Illinois for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Brooks. As a former social scientist, this is a topic of particular interest to me. In the 110th Congress, when Congressman Baird chaired this subcommittee, he held a series of 3 hearings examining the role of social, behavioral, and economic sciences in helping to develop solutions to some of society's most pressing challenges. The areas of focus of these hearings were energy, national security, and health. During these hearings, we heard testimony from 13 witnesses, all of whom agreed with little or no reservation that the SBE sciences provide significant benefits to society in a good return on taxpayer investments. Now, a few years before that, when Republicans held the majority, and my friend Bob Inglis chaired the subcommittee, he held a hearing on the role of social science research in disaster preparedness and response. I want to elaborate a bit on that topic in particular because I believe that with the severe floods, tornadoes, wildfires, hurricanes, and oil spills that hit many of our communities in recent years, the loss of life and property we have witnessed from some of these events, especially just in the last few weeks, this will resonate with all of us. The Geography and Spatial Sciences program within the SBE Directorate has been instrumental in advancing the use of Geographic Information Systems, or GIS. These tools have helped us visualize and understand the vulnerabilities of communities to natural disasters, and they have helped policymakers make better decisions on where to site critical infrastructure. Science funded by the SBE Directorate also helps us understand how to plan for and respond to emergencies. I'd particularly like to mention the Decision, Risk, and Management Science program, which aims to increase the understanding and effectiveness of decision-making by individuals, groups, organizations, and society. Now, I'm probably a little biased because I received my master's degree in a somewhat related field, but I think this is an absolutely critical area of research. We saw the need in the BP oil spill, with organizational and decision-making problems compounding technological ones. We also are seeing evidence of human and regulatory failure at the Fukushima reactor in Japan. SBE research can help us better quantify and evaluate risks, build resilient organizations, and help emergency management planners develop the most effective strategies for keeping members of their communities safe. And then, once the immediate danger is past, science funded by the SBE Directorate helps us understand the short-term and long-term implications of how individuals and communities respond to these events. Now, there are some who would presume to be able to determine whether a research proposal is important enough to society to merit support based solely on the title of the grant. But I think a story from a few years back would be instructive and stand as a warning to those who try to judge a grant by its title, be it in SBE or any other field. 40 years ago, Senator William Proxmire created the Golden Fleece Awards, long before Taxpayers for Common Sense appropriated the term. Senator Proxmire famously gave one of these rewards to E.F. Knipling for his research on the sexual behavior of the screwworm fly. The senator did not know it at the time, but the screwworm is a parasite that kills livestock and occasionally humans. And this particular line of research helped save the lives of millions of livestock, and as a result, saved the cattle industry $20 billion. That was $20 billion return on a $250,000 grant. On top of that, consumers enjoyed a 5% decrease in the cost of beef at the supermarket. Dr. Knipling ended up winning the 1999 World Food Prize for his work on parasites, and the senator ended up apologizing for his attack. Now, I tell this story not because I want to pick on Senator Proxmire or because I think the NSF is perfect. Reasonable people might disagree about priorities within the SBE Directorate, and it's job to be vigilant. It's our job to be vigilant and to make sure that taxpayer dollars are being spent wisely. And in spite of my own background, or maybe because of it, I question the value of some social science research that I read sometimes out there. But I'm going to paraphrase our former colleague, Dr. Baird, in saying that in today's hearing, as in the previous 4 hearings I mentioned, I hope we are all prepared to have a rational discussion about the value of social, behavioral, and economic sciences overall to our society and to the taxpayer. And so I thank the chairman for holding this hearing today. As I said, I think it's always important that we do make sure that the taxpayers' money is being used wisely. And I want to thank our witnesses for being here this morning. I look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Lipinski, for your remarks and your insight. If there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. At this time, I would like to introduce our witness panel. Dr. Myron Gutmann is the NSF Assistant Director for the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Science Directorate. Prior to his appointment at NSF, he chaired the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research at the University of Michigan and specializes in historical demography and population environment relationships with a focus on Europe and the Americas. Dr. Hilary Enger Elfenbein, have I pronounced that correctly? Okay, thank you, is Associate Professor of the Olin School of Business at Washington University in St. Louis. She holds a Ph.D. in organizational behavior from Harvard and specializes in emotion in the workplace research. Dr. Peter Wyatt Wood is President of the National Association of Scholars. Prior to this position, he had a distinguished career as Professor of Anthropology at both Boston University and at King's College, as well as Provost at King's College. Ms. Diana Furchtgott-Roth, did I get that one correct? Okay, thank you, is a Senior Fellow and Director of the Center of Employment Policy at the Hudson Institute. Prior to her current employment, she was Chief Economist for the Department of Labor. As our witnesses should know, spoken testimony is limited to 5 minutes each. after which the members of the committee will have 5 minutes each to ask questions. I now recognize our first witness, Dr. Myron Gutmann, Associate Director, Directorate for Social Behavior and Economic Science, National Science Foundation.
Chairman Brooks, Ranking Member Lipinski, and members of the subcommittee, good morning. Thank you for inviting me to testify today about the important research that the National Science Foundation supports in the social, behavioral, and economic sciences, and how that research is contributing to the nation's benefit. NSF is the only agency in the federal government that supports basic research in the social and behavioral sciences. It does so in an environment that encourages transformative scientific progress that crosses all boundaries. Through the SBE Directorate, the NSF funds more than half of the university-based social and behavioral sciences research in the nation, and almost all of the transformative basic science research that our society requires. The American people can take great pride in our record of achievement, which includes support for 43 Nobel laureates in economics. Among them is the first woman to win the economics award, Dr. Elinor Ostrom. Our sciences are concerned with human actions and decision-making at every level and at every scale. Researchers study everything from the cells and structures of an individual brain to individual behavior to the actions of social groups and organizations. Our mission in research and training encompasses the disciplines of neuroscience, psychology, geography, economics, anthropology, political science, sociology, and linguistics. In addition to the two research divisions, the Social and Economic Sciences Division and the Behavioral and Cognitive Sciences Division, the SBE Directorate houses the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, which produces data about science and engineering that are widely used in higher education, industry, and government. Through partnerships with other NSF directorates and federal agencies, the scientists we support bring their unique expertise to the scientific and societal problems of today and tomorrow. We have recently partnered with the Department of Defense to fund research that will help understand the challenges of terrorism and national security and advance democracy around the world. In terms of the allocation of funding, our largest commitments are to economics, to neuroscience, psychology, learning, and language, to interdisciplinary science related to decision-making, and to our statistical programs. We also allocate resources to smaller programs based on the needs of the science and the quality of the proposals we receive. Thousands of scientists assess the merit of the 5,000 proposals we receive annually, leading to some 1,100 awards. Our basic research is transforming areas of science ranging from crisis management and response to the organization of the brain and ways that the brain converts thought to action. This is a body of work with potential implications for understanding autism, PTSD, and other cognitive disorders. In one example, a team composed of SBE scientists, biomechanical engineers, computer scientists, and others built a brain-computer language interface for an individual with complete paralysis. He learned to communicate using an artificial speech synthesizer controlled by his mental efforts. U.S. taxpayers have already seen measurable gains. SBE supported fundamental developments in geographical information systems. These technologies have resulted in a multi-billion-dollar U.S.-based industry, jobs for our citizens, and great societal benefits. In another notable example, researchers supported by SBE applied economic matching theory to develop a system for kidney transplants that shortened waiting times and has the potential to save thousands of lives. Most dramatically for our nation, spectrum auctions, also based on theoretical research supported by SBE, generated more than $50 billion for the U.S. Treasury between 1994 and 2007. There is much more that our scientists can and will do in the future with our nation's support. Thank you for the opportunity to share some of our research with you today. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Gutmann. Next, the chair recognizes our second witness, Dr. Hilary Enger Elfenbein, Associate Professor, Washington University in St. Louis.
Chairman Brooks, Ranking Member Lipinski, and distinguished members of the committee, it is an honor to appear before you today. I've been asked here to speak about my basic research in the social and behavioral sciences and how that work is being used by the military, business, and medicine to create a valuable return on investment for the U.S. taxpayer. My core research is in the area of emotion recognition, that is, our ability to recognize another person's facial expressions, vocal tones, and body language. This is a skill so fundamental that its absence is a warning sign of serious disorders such as schizophrenia and autism, which is a growing epidemic in our country. Basic research to understand topics like this serves as a foundation for later applications that can sometimes be years down the road. The Army Research Institute took the initiative to use my research showing that emotion recognition accuracy partially breaks down across cultures. To quote them, "The course of events in Iraq and Afghanistan has emphasized the role of human rather than technological solutions in influencing the outcome of conflicts, making interpersonal skills an increasingly important set of tools for the warfighter." In some cases, errors in nonverbal communication have been tragic. For example, at checkpoints in Iraq where soldiers have been involved in needless escalation of conflict with civilians because they could not tell who did versus did not wish them harm. I recently served as a consultant for the Army's efforts to incorporate nonverbal communication training for our men and women going overseas. My work is also used by industry as businesses increasingly focus on emotional intelligence and other related skills in the workforce to achieve a competitive edge. Our U.S. economy is increasingly service-oriented, collaborative, and global. My work also has applications in medicine, given that the link between emotional skills and emotional disorders is so strong that some researchers use emotion recognition tests as a way to monitor the effectiveness of their medical treatments. As a business school professor, I cannot help but point out the unusually high rate of return that we receive from investments in the basic sciences. America's support of cutting-edge basic research is an engine of innovation that creates university-level opportunities, attracting the best minds from all over the world. Education is a large export industry. Top scientists often stay in the U.S., start companies here, and pay taxes here, repaying the federal investments many times over. Only the public sector can make these investments because industry support is for research that has advanced closer to commercialization. Agencies like the NSF are in the best position to prioritize federal funding for SBE research because they draw from groups of scientists across a range of disciplines and perspectives rather than to rely on any one person's expertise. The social and behavioral sciences in general are important because technology, health, industry, and politics are ultimately in the hands of people who behave rationally and irrationally. A critique often leveled at social scientists is that our research is obvious. Although findings can seem intuitive, the scientific process has demonstrated that many intuitions are wrong. For example, strange behavior is no more common at the full moon. People do not blindly follow suggestions under hypnosis, and people with schizophrenia do not have multiple personalities. These findings are useful beyond their mere curiosity value in addressing real problems. For example, the stigma and misunderstanding around mental illnesses such as schizophrenia prevents many people from seeking treatments that are readily available for the benefit of their families and for economic productivity. In addition to intuitions that are wrong, some intuitions are also contradictory. For example, too many cooks spoil the broth, and yet many hands make light the work. When staffing a team, we need to know which one is right. Ultimately, in supporting basic research, the nature of the scientific process is such that you cannot predict in advance where each project will go. That is why it's important to fund a portfolio of projects with the expectation that some may pay off, but some may not. From my own experience, I can tell you that I did not anticipate the military applications at the time that I did my work. Indeed, in the spring of 2007, a first-year member of Congress proposed canceling my NSF grant because he thought the title sounded silly. Ironically, this occurred just as the Army identified this same basic research as having applications for training our warfighters, and they issued a call for applied research that extended these basic findings. This experience highlighted for me the relationship between basic and applied research, and how applied research uses basic research as its foundation. The NSF funds basic research. Some people might ask at a time of fiscal crisis whether we can afford to fund the social and behavioral sciences. I believe that we can't afford not to. Thank you for this opportunity to speak today, and I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Elfenbein. The chair next recognizes our third witness, Dr. Peter Wood, President of the National Association of Scholars.
Thank you, Chairman Brooks and Ranking Member Lipinski. The National Association of Scholars stands in a somewhat different position than representatives of the NSF or a esteemed researcher in the field of emotions, I represent roughly 3,000 faculty members, a great many of them social scientists, and a great many who have been recipients of NSF funding over the years. We are primarily concerned with the integrity of the research enterprise in higher education, but we also recognize that higher education is not an island and that the academy has to play its role in the retrenchment of the federal budget, and that what we are facing with deep deficits in this country and the overall need for financial stringency is something that the social scientists will have to bear as well as everybody else. So the question that I would like to address in these few minutes is how we can do this with the least harm to our basic scientific enterprise. Now, the National Science Foundation is not a profligate element in the government. Its review of proposals is notoriously very strict. The proposals that win funding are seldom trivial, and it has been pretty good in resisting appeals to short-term thinking and politicization. Not that those things have been totally absent, but in my view that once we have reviewed the NSF budget and other parts of the federal budget for the trivialities, there still is going to be a need to make cuts in areas that will infect some basic research. So I think what the committee needs, what Congress has to have in hand, is some approach to triage, some way to figure out among a lot of very good proposals and well-intended funding, which cuts can be made that will produce the least harm. In my written testimony, I've suggested 6 principles that might guide that. The first is that a great deal of attention needs to be placed on where funding is available from outside the academy that might substitute for loss of NSF funds. There are numerous foundations in this country that do support basic research. As a university administrator, I know that roughly half of our funding in research universities has come from non-governmental sources. We can, if we devote ourselves to that task, probably make cuts in the federal budget that will do little harm to important basic research if outside funding is available. But those cuts need to be made strategically and tactically to be sure that they are in areas where there is private support. A second consideration is that the NSF is a major player in the production of new PhDs in this country. It uses its funds, rightfully so, to support both graduate students who are in graduate programs and those who are finishing and working on their dissertations. But we produce way too many PhDs in the social, behavioral, and economic sciences. We know that because many of them end up forced into the market for contingent faculty members. They work as adjuncts for extraordinarily low wages, or they're forced out of the academic world altogether. We need to be thoughtful about this, that we can probably find ways to cut the budget that takes account of actual labor force needs. Economics plays a double role here. Finally, or not finally, but in a group of considerations, I think the committee needs to be aware that the social sciences have been, to a lamentable degree, infected by anti-science methodologies and anti-science ideologies. In my own field, anthropology, recently the key association, the American Anthropological Association, has been floating the idea of eliminating science from its mission statement. I don't know that that's going to go through. There's pretty stiff opposition from those of us anthropologists who think our field is a science, but nonetheless, this anti-science element, usually called postmodernism, is abroad and is part of what goes on in our fields. Now, when I review the proposals that have actually been funded by the National Science Foundation, I see little direct evidence that this ideology is present, but I am aware that anthropologists and other social scientists are very clever about disguising their real intentions, and that's something to pay attention to. And finally, we are in an era in which higher education overall is in the midst of a deep restructuring, and it's important that the committee take account that just the rise of for-profit education and online education is going to change the market for social scientists. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wood. The chair now recognizes our final witness, Diana Furchtgott-Roth, Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you so much for inviting me to testify here today. We have a spending crisis in America, and we should only spend when there is a compelling interest. We have universities that fund these disciplines, and it should not be the role of the government. In my field, economics, original seminal works were produced without government funds by Adam Smith, John Maynard Keynes, Frank Knight, Friedrich Hayek, even Karl Marx. They all produced their work without any government funding at all. Social and behavioral scientists abound in the universities and private businesses. Their research products, always interesting and valuable, can be sold to journals and corporations. Successful SBE research is well supported by think tanks, private corporations, law firms, and foundations that can use the results. There are many private foundations that provide grants for social science research, including the Kauffman Foundation, the Smith-Richardson Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, just to name a few. Even if one believes that the United States has an interest in producing social, behavioral, and economic research, it's not clear that the National Science Foundation is always the appropriate entity. In fiscal year 2010, the NSF spent $255 million on SBE research. NIH alone spent $4.1 billion on behavioral and social science research in fiscal year 2010. And why is there a need for NSF to do this funding? As Dr. Wood just said, having a grant-making agency such as the NSF in charge of government research funding leads to a greater possibility of politicization and concentration in certain areas. This is true even under the merit review system, where researchers have to show the scientific and broad effects of their work. There's a temptation for politics to enter into the allocation of funds and for research projects to be allocated with non-scientific criteria, including gender, ethnic, and geographic criteria, rather than the merit of the research. Note the comment earlier from Dr. Gutmann about how NSF funding funded the first woman Nobel Economics Prize winner. Of course, politics enters into government agencies also, but the bias of politics is less likely to all be in one direction. For the NSF to argue persuasively that it should continue funding research on SBE, NSF should demonstrate that the research is important and that it won't be funded by other sources. Perhaps these arguments are articulated somewhere, but they're hard to find. They're not on the NSF website. They're not in annual reports prepared by NSF. Unless the agency can clearly make the arguments, there's little, if any, need for NSF funding to fund much SBE research. During our time of shrinking federal dollars, when our debt is over $14 trillion and our deficit this year is projected to be $1.6 trillion, the NSF should focus on basic physical and life science research rather than research in SBE. One exception, and just to draw a couple of parameters, might be longitudinal studies such as the University of Michigan Panel Study on Income Dynamics, a survey funded by NSF, which has followed 5,000 families since 1968. Perhaps these kinds of data sources should receive government funding because there might be a public interest in having a continuous data set, and a private foundation might be tempted to drop the funding. But this could also be funded by the Labor Department, as the National Longitudinal Survey is, which began in the 1960s. A couple of other parameters that I might consider suggesting: if the NSF wants to fund research in my field, economics, to only support projects that create new data that are made publicly available to other researchers within 5 years. Second, only pay for data entry by research assistants and not by faculty, not faculty compensation, not computer hardware, not computer software. This would guarantee that NSF wasn't used to subsidize other purposes within the universities. I understand that the federal government often has a need for research. The military, as Dr. Elfenbein just mentioned, has a need for certain kinds of projects. But then the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, they could put out requests for proposal and fund that research by itself. Thank you very much for allowing me the privilege of testifying today.
Thank you, Ms. Furchtgott-Roth. Dr. Gutmann, inasmuch as Ms. Furchtgott-Roth mentioned some of your prior remarks, would you like to make any response in a general sense to hers, or should we go into our normal question session?
I think you could go into your general question session. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Well, I thank the panel for their testimony. Reminding members that committee rules limit questioning to 5 minutes, the chair will at this point open the round of questions. Normally the chair recognizes himself for questions, but inasmuch as we have a birthday boy here celebrating his 85th birthday, the chair at this point defers to my elder statesman, Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you very much. Our country faces some huge challenges in the economic sector, in the energy sector, and they of course are related. And how we respond to those challenges is going to be enormously important. And obviously the social behavioral sciences are going to be front and center here in how we respond to these challenges. Well, I'd like to ask Dr. Gutmann, do you think that our research, our understanding of the behavioral social sciences is ahead of or behind our knowledge in the hard sciences?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Bartlett. It's very interesting. I think that we are on par with what's happening in other sciences. I'm not sure I'm always comfortable with the term hard science and soft science. That's a discussion we could have. But I think that our progress is interesting and commendable. And we are, in the areas you're describing, for example, in making progress on energy, we're looking forward to making significant investments in research that will help understand how to best arrive at an appropriate future for energy use.
Thank you. Dr. Elfenbein, 70% of all communication is nonverbal, and you referenced this phenomenon. Is this an international language, which means that if you can't speak the other guy's language at all, if you really understand body language and the nonverbal part of communications, you can understand 70% of what he's trying to tell you? Or, yeah.
Apologies. Thank you for the question. As far as scientists know, yes, communication via nonverbal cues is a largely universal language. It does have, and the work that I've done that's been funded by the NSF shows that that although much of the signal makes it through cultural boundaries, some of the signal does get lost along the way. But I think our intuitions do serve us well in this case, that we can watch foreign films in a different language and maintain much of the original meaning, or communicate across species boundaries, for example, with pets, and maintain much of the meaning of nonverbal communication, but something does get lost along the way. And for this reason, misunderstandings are potentially more dangerous in the case of nonverbal behavior, because if we were speaking a different verbal language, we would realize that and get a translator. But if we have different meaning imbued into the cues that we use on a nonverbal basis, we may not realize that, and we may have a misunderstanding that doesn't get feedback, that doesn't get corrected.
Dr. Wood, you mentioned foundations. I regret that a huge percentage of research is funded by the federal government. In some institutions, medical particularly, more than 90% of all research is funded by the federal government. The federal government can be very arbitrary and capricious, and I think we put at risk our research, our basic research, if it's funded by the federal government. But lamentably, we have forcibly taken money from you, and we have not given you the option of you using your money to support basic research and then giving you a tax credit for doing that. And so here we are. And my question is, in the behavioral sciences, which I think are going to become increasingly important in the future as we face these crises in our country, is there really enough support, non-governmental support, you think, for these basic sciences that we could responsibly, drastically reduce our funding for NSF in this area?
Well, I wouldn't favor drastically reducing funding for the NSF in this area, but I do think that significant cuts will be made. Will the private sector, will foundations be able to pick that up? I believe so, that the social science research that has real depth and real grip is appealing to a lot of people besides government agencies. Now, of course, the transition will be hard, and it will mean that there probably will be worthy projects that go unfunded. As my colleague, Dr. Furchtgott-Roth, has just pointed out, some of the most fundamental research in the social sciences, going back in her field, economics, to Adam Smith, in mine to the American founder of anthropology, Lewis Henry Morgan, took place without any government funding at all. It was pursued as a form of research by impassioned amateurs. And there is a lot of really important research that doesn't actually take a great deal of funding. Done strategically and carefully, a lot can be done without really in-depth federal support, or even with that much support from foundations. So I'm optimistic that, yes, the really important stuff will get done, even if we have to take some lamentable cuts in federal funding.
If you indulge me just a moment, Mr. Chairman, our fourth witness, I am old enough to have known Herman Kahn. Did your stay there overlap his?
Unfortunately, it did not, no, but we remember him very fondly and read his work.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. The chair next recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Lipinski, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll start out by asking Dr. Gutmann to sort of follow up on the Dr. Bartlett's question there about if there were significant cuts, drastic cuts in SBE funding through NSF. What do you see the impact as being? Do you think that this would be picked up by others?
So I think there are really two questions raised here, and I'm happy to briefly answer both of them, Mr. Lipinski. One question is it likely that private sources could replace a substantial amount of funding that's currently devoted to the social and behavioral and economic sciences? And I think the answer to that is no. The great foundations that have been mentioned earlier are largely interested in solving relatively specific problems. The Gates Foundation is very rich. They largely are interested in certain areas of educational achievement and improving health, global health. Those are extremely important topics. But their approach to them is very applied. It's very directed towards solving the problem today and making investments today. They're much less interested in the basic science that organizations like NSF support. And so I don't think, in fact, that there is a reasonable chance that private foundations are going to invest more than they are investing today. The second question that you ask is a question about what would happen if government support for social and behavioral sciences through NSF or other agencies would be significantly reduced. And I think that would have a very serious effect. We all recognize the budgetary needs today, and we understand that in these times we may have to accept reductions in what we spend. That's the reality that we face, and we're not averse to understanding that reality. But significant reductions in SBE funding are going to deprive our society of the kind of basic research that Dr. Elfenbein talked about, where we go into problems not knowing the outcome and where the long-term chain of research developments really transform our view of the world. And that's a significant risk. So I don't think that's a good idea, and I think it will have undue and severe consequences for the American people.
Thank you, Dr. Gutmann. There are a lot of things that Dr. Wood had stated, and I think in general that we'd find some agreement on those. This question of whether or not if funding would be picked up, I think I agree. A lot of good research does not need much or any funding, but there's a lot of research that does need the funding to be able to be done. I can't at all disagree that there's an oversupply of PhDs, having gone through that whole process myself, and having been an assistant professor, but my experience is usually those who do have NSF funding are people who do wind up getting jobs in NSF. The whole process seems to be a good, almost weeding out of choosing those who are doing good research and those who are able to work with professors who are doing good research. One thing I wanted to get back to Dr. Gutmann on is I understand that the NSF had signed an MOU with the Department of Defense to do SBE research, and then after 1 year of funding, both the NSF and DOD putting in the funding level, DOD had then backed out of that and said NSF should just be funding this research. Can you give a little background on that?
Most of those discussions occurred before I got to NSF, but I've been part of the process since. And my understanding is that the Department of Defense has felt that their resources could be better deployed elsewhere. And so we did have one cycle of making awards. Those awards were made about 1.5 years ago. And those awards have been very successful. We've had a first PI meeting. There's a lot of interesting research that's being done in this joint program between NSF and the Department of Defense in the area of national security. But at this time, the Department of Defense doesn't seem to have the resources to commit to it further.
Thank you. And I just want to, my time's almost up. I just wanted to also say I agree, I think, with Dr. Gutmann had just said, yeah, we know that these are difficult times for the budget, and there are certainly things that we can all find problems with, maybe in some research that receives funding. But the bottom line is, what is the overall contribution that this research makes, and is it worth the funding? And I think we generally. That's the question we want to address, and I think that we have a lot of evidence that it is worth. The funding is worthwhile, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at it. So I think, thank you again. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lipinski. The chair next recognizes Dr. Harris.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, everyone on the panel, for sharing your morning with us. Dr. Gutmann, let me ask you a question. As we look through the fiscal FY12 budget, SBE budget, there is the Science, Engineering, and Education for Sustainability portfolio, which got a 174% increase over last year and now is nearly a quarter of the entire SBE budget request. What falls under that portfolio? Science, Engineering, and Education for Sustainability portfolio.
Right. I respectfully, Mr. Harris, thank you for asking the question. I respectfully think that that budget is not as large as that, but it is
the FY12 request.
The FY12 request, but it is significant. I won't deny that. I think it's about 15 or 18% of our budget. But in any event, it is a significant investment, and I recognize that. These are, in this broad area, we have a portfolio of research that involves the geographic and spatial sciences, studies that link environment and society, and studies that explore the relationship between consumers and producers of energy and energy technologies. So in this, for example, is our proposed investment in an NSF-wide initiative to understand how to make the best use of energy in the future, and what are the roles. The research that would be SBE related would be research that's part of broad interdisciplinary teams that considers markets for energy, consumption of energy, and how people think about energy use in order to make the most effective use of our resources.
That, just looking at all the testimony about how basic research, the SBE research is kind of basic research and not politically motivated, shouldn't be politically motivated. my first question: why wouldn't the Department of Energy be funding something that so fundamentally looks at energy? Why is it stuck in a basic science area of research funding? Why not the Department of Energy? Aren't you wandering into somebody else's bailiwick, perhaps a politically motivated reason?
That's
I mean,
great.
who made the decision to increase it by 174%? The request by 174%. Well, you can get back
respected
to me.
by increasing it by whatever it's increased by.
That's fine. You can get back to me on the exact numbers.
We'll get back to you on the
And
exact
if you can
numbers.
get that answer to me, I appreciate that.
But may I continue with my response?
Well, I'm sorry. I only have 2 more minutes, so
Okay,
I'm going to go on to the next question for you here. And this is similar in a similar vein. In a brief review of the SBE rapid grants, and you're familiar with those, the ones that don't undergo peer review process, a great deal of funding seems to have been spent on evaluating the results and effectiveness of stimulus programs and funding. Now, I've got to tell you, I mean, most people would look at the stimulus and said, unemployment was lower than it is now. Before we spent all that money, I'm not sure we need a big expensive grant to figure out what it is. We just have to watch the unemployment figures and the national economic indicators. But can you tell me how much the taxpayers invested in this, and what the results of any of this information is? I mean, I assume since it was a rapid grant, you already have results, because that's why you put it through a process that didn't require peer review, so you can get rapid results, I take it.
I'll have to respond later to you about the details of that. I don't have that directly in front of me.
But is that true? I mean, were there rapid grants truly awarded to look on evaluating the results and effectiveness of stimulus programs and funding?
Yes, there were, sir.
And you consider that basic science?
That research was done under the rapid mechanism because certain research had to be done.
Is that basic science?
Yes, I do believe so.
You think that it's basic science that couldn't be looked at in other more conventional means that would require bypassing peer review?
There's a process of review that's undertaken for those, sir.
Okay, and I've got the numbers here in front of me. The SES fiscal FY12 request is $56.98 million, $57 million.
Yes, sir.
174% increase over last year's request. Do you know where that increase originated?
These decisions were made in the leadership of the National Science Foundation.
Do you agree with those decisions?
Yes, I do.
So you think in an era where we have a $1.6 trillion deficit, we should be increasing the funding to that particular segment by 174%, so that we can somehow engage in some study of education for sustainability?
Well, the parts of that are within our directorate are broadly conceived, and I believe that whatever the number is, it's an appropriate investment.
Well, it's $56.98 million. I mean,
yes.
Do you disagree with that number? I mean, I'm assuming it's written in a budget. So let's not pretend that it's some made up. It's $56.98 million, 174% increase.
It's
you think that's an appropriate use?
It's the 174% that I'm questioning.
That's what?
It's the 174%.
Well, can you get a written response back to me about exactly
happy.
what the percent is of the increase?
So. Yeah, I'd be happy.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Doctor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. And Dr. Gutmann, if you had any other questions that were submitted just then that you want to supplement your answers to, feel free, just submit them to the committee.
We'll be glad to do that, sir. Thank you.
Next, we have Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate you giving me the opportunity to address this panel. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Gutmann for your outstanding work at the University of Michigan. I'm a lifelong Detroiter, and I appreciate your contributions. Ms. Furchtgott-Roth, I do hear your reservations about SBE research funding through NSF, but I do acknowledge your recognition of the value of longitudinal studies conducted at University of Michigan. Dr. Gutmann, I'm on the Homeland Security Committee, and we're concerned about the risk of terrorist attack, especially in the area that I represent, Metro Detroit, and then also our country's ability to help prepare and respond to disasters. How does NSF ensure that it's research that's related to national security and to disaster response is communicated to not only federal officials, but state and local government officials. And that's so important because the first line of defense in an emergency, whether it's a natural disaster or terrorist attack, is our first responders that are hired by our state and local governments.
So, Mr. Clark, thank you very much for the interesting question. I appreciate your comments. Our first expectation, of course, in the area of basic research is that researchers are going to communicate through the standard channels of scholarly communication. That's most of what, that's our first understanding. But I know in terms of the work that I did in providing data in various times in my career to the state and local and federal policy community, and that they read that literature assiduously and follow that. But NSF works hard to get the word out in other ways. We require our researchers to provide project outcome reports that are written in a way that a broad audience can understand them. We highlight in various ways our most important findings. And I work personally very hard to participate in multi-agency working groups, the Committee on Science. I co-chair the Committee of Science, Subcommittee on Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences. We work together in the area of hazards, very closely with NOAA on hazard communications so that they can get that out. We work with the National Institute of Justice in various ways on those topics. So I think what we try to do is a mix of things that encourage researchers to communicate directly through scholarly communications and other communications, and we encourage and we work ourselves to make sure that the most important findings that we learn about communicate to the policy area.
Thank you. This is just a follow-up on a different issue to either you, Dr. Gutmann, or Dr. Elfenbein. And this deals with the value of SBE research in terms of overturning many times our conventional thinking about certain types of behavior or decision-making process. Can you outline some examples about the potential value of these findings as a result of this research?
Okay, thank you. That's a great question. We always get asked the question, isn't social and behavioral science research obvious when we see it? And the answer is no, it's not. A lot of behavioral research really doesn't, as Dr. Elfenbein highlighted in her testimony, a lot of those things are really not known. I mean, the work that I cited that had to do with how auctions operate, that led to this enormous production of income to the U.S. Treasury, much more than SBE has ever cost the U.S. government, came about when researchers discovered that, theoretical researchers discovered that auctions and bargaining were very similar mathematically, and that if you did that and looked at them carefully, you could combine auctions and bargaining in ways that produced both better products for people to use and more income for the United States government. I don't know if Dr. Elfenbein wants to add something to that.
Just that I think that the critique that researchers are often studying pieces that just satisfy their own curiosity. On a related note, I think that when we find these applications, we don't often the basic research has already been done, and it's difficult, I think, to start in the other direction. So we can think about basic research that had transformative results, but we couldn't start with the question that needs transformation and then step backwards and say, let me go ahead and commission basic research that hasn't already been done. And just in my own experience, the work that the Army took an interest in, if they had said, oh, well, we have this problem now with our soldiers serving overseas, let me go back and get some basic science to help solve this problem, the work that I had done that they were interested in had started 10 years prior to that point. And so I want to just make a point around the unpredictability of this process, so we can look at wonderful case studies of work that's had transformative impact, but as the Monday morning quarterback, we can look back at that work, but in terms of funding that work from now forward, basic research is a very unpredictable process, and I think it's important for us to think about this portfolio of projects that we fund, because we can't always predict when an insight will lead to some kind of application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. The chair next recognizes Dr. Benishak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the panel for your testimony. I just have a few questions. We have people coming before us all the time, asking for money. And, we're spending, for every dollar the government spends, we have to borrow 40 cents. And everybody thinks that their project is worthy. I don't really see how we can be increasing your budget 18% in the time of this fiscal crisis. I think we need to streamline the situation. I looked at some of the things that disturb me as a physician is really the rapid grants where there's not peer reviewed, and I kind of feel for the minority there when they were saying you can't judge the research projects by its title, but it concerns me. I'm quoting, looking at Mr. Wood's testimony. He quotes a project with a title like, what is it here? Engineering and Social Justice, Research and Education of Incommensurable Fields of Practice. It's a $300,000 grant to study the field of engineering and its the education of engineers and their relationship to social justice, and has a title and it has an abstract, and I just don't see how this is a project that's worthy of funding in a tight economy like we have. How do you justify an 18% increase in your funding when we have a situation like this? And I'm looking at grant proposals and an abstract that seems to me like a waste of money.
All of our projects are subject to considerable review. You asked the question about the rapid awards. We made roughly 1,100 awards in fiscal 2010. There were 23 rapid awards. They were largely devoted to issues like the earthquakes in Haiti and elsewhere in response to immediate circumstances that required researchers to talk with people soon after the event. In the case of the ethics program award that you describe, this is a program designed to increase knowledge about how ethical processes emerge across all areas of science. It was made in a competition we have in this area, and it was peer reviewed. I can't go beyond what you've said about it in any specific way, but I think that it's very hard just as it's hard for you to understand how we make the award, it's hard for me to criticize the whole program based on a single project.
Well, I understand that. It's just that we end up talking about millions of dollars with the sum of all these projects, and I think there has to be some sort of a prioritizing of spending, and I just don't see how an 18% increase is justified when I see examples like this. But
I could show you many more projects that I think we would agree have great value in terms of basic science.
Well, that may be true. It's just that there's no money, and everybody says, well, cut everything else, but don't cut mine. And believe me, we need to fix the budget. So I think everybody's going to end up taking a cut, and I just think it's unrealistic to make this request. Dr. Elfenbein?
If I could be recognized, I think that to justify an increase in funds at a time of fiscal crisis, you have to believe that this is an investment, not an expense.
Everything is an investment, okay? I mean, everybody comes to me with the same answer. And every department wants everybody else cut, but my department is an investment. So who should we cut to feed, to make sure that you get your extra money? That's just unrealistic. So I think you have an unrealistic expectation as to what's happening here, and that you have to streamline your research. I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Van Zak. Next, the chair recognizes Mr. Holtgren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. Following up, I think we all recognize clearly that these are challenging times that we're in, and so much of the challenge I think we face is there's a lot of good things out there, but what are the best things? What are the things that we have to do? And so I want to just talk a little bit about prioritization, and I'd ask each of you, I guess I would start with Dr. Wood, if I could, and then if each of you could make a comment. Where do you draw the line between national need and priority research, transformational research, and research that's simply interesting and intriguing, but probably not really game-changing research? How do we draw that line? Because I think that is really some of the decisions we need to make.
Well, I would draw the line between basic research and applied research. That would be one line. I would also draw lines between basic research and research that has fairly self-evidently an appeal to the passions of the moment. In my written testimony, I mentioned some other things like a study of titled Out of the Shadows, $148,000 spent on looking at the lives of illegal immigrants before, during, and after legalization. That's not basic research. That's appealing to something that's going on in the policy arena, and I think that one should look at the NSF funding with the question of whether that kind of thing really falls into the category that Dr. Elfenbein was talking about, where we're likely to get insights that lead to applications down the road. Well, no, we're really just sort of flattering ourselves that we can use social science to fill in pictures for us that are a little bit vague, or feed advocacy groups with data that looks scientific. That's the sort of thing that I think that the Congress should be aware of in this sort of funding. And it's not that the NSF does that all the time, but if you look through those 1,100 awards, you can probably find a segment of them that seem to be more driven by identity politics, by policy debates, rather than basic science. Is there some sort of linguistic formulation where you could absolutely draw the line so that the NSF administrators knew we're going to do this and not that? I think that's very difficult, but it's certainly possible to push hard in the direction that what we want out of NSF is true basic science, not all kinds of politicized stuff dressed up as basic science.
I guess I would answer the question by saying, is this the role of government to do? And Dr. Gutmann just mentioned a big project they have, how to make the best use of energy in the future. We have companies that are producing energy. We have consumers who are buying energy. We don't need the government to figure out how to make the best use of energy in the future. We just see what consumers are buying and what they're not buying. If we think there's a social cost of using certain kinds of energy, such as, gee, we shouldn't be using so much oil, we can put a tax on oil to encourage consumers to purchase less of it. This isn't something that we need to devote government funds to doing. Now, there are other areas where perhaps we are falling behind, not in the social sciences, perhaps in the physical sciences. You see physics graduates as leading universities. They go off to investment banks on Wall Street rather than studying physics. There is probably a greater role for NSF grants in the physics, chemistry, those hard scientists where graduates don't get jobs. But in my field, economics, corporations, banks, the Federal Reserve, other government agencies employ economists. There's no shortages of jobs for economists where the private and other governmental sectors pay for this research.
In prioritizing research, I want to emphasize the importance of peer review over political review. I think that it's difficult to see sometimes the value of projects when looked at out of context, but the scientific method is such that scientists often take large problems that are difficult to solve and break them into smaller problems that can be solved. And when looked at out of context, those smaller problems might seem silly from the outside. They might seem like they might seem like ideas willingness to ridicule publicly, but when seen from the eyes of people who have expertise in that area, their value can be known. And so I want to distinguish the importance of having those with expertise involved in the process, and rather than strictly political review of grants and their value. But in addition, I want to emphasize the lack of predictability from the time of basic research being done to know just how valuable and how applicable it's going to be, and the difficulty of taking a look and culling through a portfolio of projects by saying, what do you think now is going to be transformative later? Very often we just don't have that ability to look into the crystal ball, and what we need to think about is portfolios of projects. Thank you.
Is there still time for me to speak?
Go ahead.
Mr. Brooks, thank you. Thank you. I think these are very important questions, and the National Science Foundation, I assure you, recognizes the financial challenges, the fiscal challenges that the U.S. government faces. It is, I think it's fundamental, though, to say that that we feel very strongly, and I feel very strongly, that basic science in the social and behavioral sciences meets the definition in economics of a public good. There aren't rivals for it. It's not excludable, to use the formal definitions. And the basic science we support is really critical to develop over the long term. We recognize that we're going to have to make choices, and we believe that our combination of interagency discussions, leadership discussions within NSF, and the peer review process give us an opportunity that when we're going to have to make priority decisions, to make good priority decisions in the ways that Dr. Elfenbein and Dr. Wood discuss, that drive us towards fundamental understandings.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. My opportunity now to ask questions. And I know I might be beating a dead horse to some degree, but I do want to emphasize the precarious situation that the federal government's finances are in. I presume that Ms. Furchtgott-Roth, being an economist, probably has the best understanding of anyone in this room. But on the chance that it might be beneficial, 58%. That's how much we have revenue for out of every dollar that we spend. The other 42 cents, give or take a penny or two, is borrowed money. We're looking at a debt ceiling issue, short term. If that's not raised, and if the Secretary of Treasurer's estimate is correct that we run out of credit on August the 2nd, then all of a sudden we're having to operate the federal government on 58 cents of every dollar. If that results in across-the-board cuts, and I don't think that it will, but if it did, that would be everyone is having to absorb 42 cents or 42% cuts like that. Long term, we're risking a federal government bankruptcy or insolvency if we continue with this string of unsustainable budget deficits. As Admiral Mullen, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, testified earlier this year to the Armed Services Committee, America's greatest threat is our national debt, not al-Qaeda, not the Taliban, not any number of nations you want to name. In that context, we as a committee, we're going to have to prioritize. Now, within Congress, you've got a lot of different attitudes and approaches on how to handle this financial situation. You've got some who want to, say, grow the economy. Well, everybody wants to do that. But then you've got a group that wants to focus primarily on spending cuts. You've got another group that wants to focus primarily on tax increases. You've got another group that wants to have a hodgepodge of spending cuts or tax increases. You've got another group that just wishes it would go away and doesn't want to deal with the problem. And I think you've got a little bit of each in the United States Congress in different amounts. And so what we're going to be charged with, worst case scenario, is trying to prioritize. And we understand how each of you have done a good job of justifying your own field. But this is for each of you to answer probably to a lesser degree than Dr. Wood, because his remarks focused on prioritization. But if we're forced to prioritize, and if we're forced to reduce spending 42%, and assuming that we're not going to do it across the board, that there's going to be some agencies that don't do as well as others do, but within the NSF framework, how would y'all prioritize cutting 42% of what we're now spending? You know, if the debt ceiling's not raised and we don't have the credit, or if the debt ceiling is raised and our creditors just decide they don't want to loan us any more money, we have to limit our spending to that 58 cents on the dollar because that's all the money we have to spend. So each of you, if you would, volunteer how you would prioritize within the NSF framework what ought to be cut. And if you recommend across the board, if you just want to do across the board, I understand that. Say everybody gets reduced 42% if that's the framework you believe, or if you believe you want to prioritize, what are your criteria? Ms. Furchtgott-Roth, how would you guide us?
Well, in times like this, when we have a fiscal crisis, the role of the government is to have a safety net for the most vulnerable and to protect our country in terms of national defense. We have researchers who are definitely not the most vulnerable among us. We're giving money to PhDs, many foreign, many who cannot get visas and then go home afterwards. And I don't think that this should be a priority. Any SBE funding should be a priority for Congress. I would say if you have to prioritize, you should only support projects that create new data that's made publicly available within 5 years, and only pay for data entry by research assistants. Don't pay for faculty compensation. Don't pay for computer hardware or software.
Thank you. Dr. Elfenbein? Dr. Gutmann?
I have a hard time dealing with hypotheticals, Mr. Brooks. I apologize. So I think I'm going to defer on this one. I really
Well, it's
don't.
not a hypothetical, Dr. Gutmann. We're going to face spending cuts. Now, the question, it might not be 42%. It might be 10, 20, 30%. But it's not a hypothetical. It will happen. I think, Ms. Furchtgott-Roth, do you think it's going to happen, that there'll be spending cuts?
Well, I very much hope for the sake of the United States, so we don't become like Greece, that there will be spending cuts. And you should consider zeroing out the whole of the SBE NSF budget in favor of other kinds of...
Yeah, I'm really disappointed if you're going to claim that this is a hypothetical. The exact number may be hypothetical. It might be 45% or 40% or 35%. But if you, and I also have a degree in economics, it's an absolute certainty that there will be spending cuts. It will either be voluntary or it will be forced upon us by the economic circumstances that we face as a nation. And maybe you're right, and maybe I'm wrong, and I hope you're right, and there aren't spending cuts, that it is hypothetical. But don't you think we need to plan for that possibility so that we can have some foresight, some thought given into it, and thereby make wiser decisions instead of it being forced upon us where we have to make snap judgments?
So obviously I'm in favor of planning, sir, and I understand your point. I think that NSF has a good record of using our merit review process to identify the most important basic science that needs to that is available to us to be done, that presents itself, and I suspect that I know that our first goals will be to protect those things that we do that are in the broad service of the government, in the, for example, our statistical activities, but also that we'll use the merit review process to ensure that the most meritorious, whatever our budget is, the most meritorious projects in basic science are supported.
Well, are you suggesting then that we should have across-the-board cuts, and that if 42% happens to be the magical number, that we should do that for NSF and let NSF decide within its own hierarchy how to allocate that, or should we as policymakers be involved in that decision?
I think you as a policymakers have a responsibility to help us make wise decisions about government expenditure. And I think, obviously, I'm here to represent the strong need for the social and behavioral sciences to be supported at NSF. We are the smallest of the directorates, and we obviously have important research, which I and others have described to you, that needs to be done, that must be done, and that must be sustained over the long term, because if we don't do that, it's a form of eating our seed corn, that there's some of this research that is really going to carry us forward.
Dr. Elfenbein or Dr. Wood, would you all like to add anything before I recognize Mr. Sarbanes?
I would like to add something to that. I would not favor across-the-board cuts. I would favor zeroing out particular parts of the NSF budget if that's what it came to. Not that this would be eliminating just bad work. There's good work that would be cut, but I think sustainability is mainly an ideology in this country and not a scientific enterprise. It's questionable as a scientific enterprise, and that should be cut. Economics, as my colleague has been saying, is a field in which almost all basic research can be done with funding from alternate sources. The dissertation support is not a major part of the NSF budget, but it's almost endlessly deferrable. If you're a graduate student finishing a dissertation, you can get a job and work on your dissertation. That's how I did mine. There are parts of this program that selectively fund programs for women and minorities. That really has no justification in basic science. That's a politicization of the NSF. And finally, the use of NSF funds for these rapid grants is almost always a mistake. There's not basic science being done under that provision. That's rushing in to fill in political stopgaps, and that could probably be cut with no damage to the basic enterprise.
Dr. Elfenbein, did you want to?
I would look to the peer review system to help identify specific grants rather than have external review. And I would take issue with the idea that we could look at areas within the NSF based on whether there are outside funding agencies that would fund them. The NSF is the source for basic research funding. We cannot count on corporations to fund anything that doesn't have immediate, clear commercialization as an impact. And what we care about in basic research is for everybody to have access, and for us to take whole areas and say that because other commercial interests may find these areas of interest, that we should leave funding to those commercial interests, risks having our basic research be not available for other scientists to use as a basis. So I would not cut NSF funding on an area by area basis in terms of whether there are other sources, other commercial interests, whether they be companies or foundations. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Next, I'm going to recognize Mr. Sarbanes, but before I do, I'm going to make this one note. If anyone wants to engage in a second round of questions, they'll certainly have that opportunity. Mr. Sarbanes?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here and for your testimony. Dr. Elfenbein, I'm glad you made that last point, because I was actually going to ask a question to that effect in terms of the NSF's role in conducting basic research and the notion that that cannot be replaced by other entities or funding sources out there, however much they might be interested in doing this kind of work. They may be focused on a different agenda or set of objectives, and you would leave sort of by the side of the road some important research that needs to be done. I wanted to ask both you and Dr. Gutmann along those lines to speak to the role that this basic research can play in sort of leveraging broader attention to the subjects that are being researched. So speak to that kind of foundational role that's played, the leveraging dimension of it. I think you, Dr. Elfenbein, alluded to this notion that if you rely solely on outside groups, many of whom are going to be commercially driven, and that's fair, that the horizons that they are looking at are shorter, and that what the NSF funding can assure is that you're getting a broader perspective and a longer horizon, and sometimes that's the most critical thing you can have to frankly stumble on the right kinds of discoveries going forward. So if you could speak a little bit more to that, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you for the question. And I do believe that the sciences, all of the sciences, including the life sciences and the physical sciences, leverage the basic research done across fields, particularly in the social and behavioral areas. And one example I would use is medicine, because ultimately any kind of medical treatment involves the compliance of the patient to to be a part of that treatment. And so we see physicians looking to behavioral research. And in my case, another example is the importance of understanding the fundamental science of emotions in order to understand emotional disorders. And this is an area of particular importance now that mental illness is being recognized for healthcare coverage at the same level as conventional medical illness. There is now a need more than ever to have cost effectiveness in the treatment of mental illness. Thank you.
So I'll only add a few words. Thank you very much for that question. One way to look at the investments that we make in science is to think about them in a very direct way about you get money back or jobs back. And very often the investment by businesses in research, which has been substantial in the history of the United States, is really directed mostly towards that. But a lot of what we support basic science research in the National Foundation for has a value that is non-monetary. Dr. Elfenbein's work on recognition of emotions has a non-monetary value, even as it has been converted to practical use by the military. We've supported a lot of work that's been very successful on detecting deception. A lot of that has to do with how interrogations, criminal interrogations and other interrogations are done. And those have value to society that are broader and longer term. The kidney matching examples that I talked about, those are healthcare examples that come from basic science research. Work that we've been supporting recently and using a rapid award for it was a research project done last year that did experiments with using modern technology to understand the transmission of the H1N1 virus when it was just happening. These are exactly things that we're using. What they were using was contact, understanding how ideas and physical presence converge to understand how something as important as an epidemic is transformed. So there's a lot of ways that it happens. It takes a long time, and even if there is financial value, it might be far in the future, but very often it has societal value that goes to health or security or justice.
I appreciate that answer, and I've just got 5 seconds left here, but also, Dr. Elfenbein, I appreciate your alluding to the issue of mental health, and it would be a shame if at a point in time, I think, when the society's finally turning and embracing, how do we address issues of mental health, that we started to pull away from some of the basic research that can help us in that area as well. And I apologize for mispronouncing your name earlier, Dr. Elfenbein. And I yield back my time. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Sarbanes. Does anyone wish to engage in a second round of questions? Chairman recognizes Minority Leader Mr. Lipinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me, Ranking Member.
I was just going to let that one go. A couple of quick questions for Dr. Gutmann, just so that we understand a little better some of the things NSF does. First of all, the grants are, I presume, awarded generally for new data to be compiled. And is this data, is there a requirement that's made publicly available?
NSF policy requires that all data be shared. There are limitations on that have to do with questions of privacy, confidentiality, and security, but NSF policy requires that all data be shared. As of earlier this year, NSF policy has shifted a little bit in order to require, in addition to the data sharing, that every proposal we receive includes a 2-page data management plan that shows how the researcher is going to manage their data and how they're going to make them available to other researchers.
I think that's a very good addition there, having done research myself, and I think it's good to have a plan beforehand about how this can be made available. The other thing I just wanted you to clarify, you said there aren't that many of these grants done in the rapid fashion, but why are they done? Why are a few done that way.
Well, we make a few of those awards every year. Again, it's an area where it's not our strategy to make very many. There were, I think, 23 or 24 of them in the fiscal year that ended last September 30th. But our goal is to understand that there are times when you have to gather data quickly, gather information quickly. Most of those tend to be when there is a physical emergency. For example, the Deepwater Horizon spill, and researchers wanted to get out and talk to people in communities while the memory was fresh about what was happening to them. And those are things that you can't do otherwise. And again, I just want to remind you how few of these there are. They're not very big awards, and we don't make very many of them, and we're extremely careful about how we make them. There's a special set of documents that are required in the process when we submit our recommendation, when program officers submit a recommendation to management of NSF, both inside the Directorate and outside within NSF, special set of documents that are required that document the timeliness of the award. It's really about timeliness. So we're very careful, and we make them only when there's a very pressing need. And this arose out of requests from Congress and others that we have the capacity to respond to emergencies.
Thank you. In my last 2 minutes, I'm going to do my Dr. Ehler's impersonation. And when I was chair of this committee last time, and Dr. Ehler's, Vern Ehler sat in this chair, I will not be nearly as wise as Dr. Ehler's, but he would like to sometimes end by imparting some wisdom from his experience. I think listening to all the witnesses, I think we can all agree, first of all, that these are very difficult budget situations that we are in, and that we shouldn't not be funding specific agenda-driven, whether it's a political agenda, whatever other agenda. That kind of research, that's not the role of the NSF. But what we do is we have the NSF so that we have what we hopefully believe is objective research being done. Now, we could all debate on, each individual grant on some of those things, I'm sure, but that's the idea there. And I know that I brought it before about some of my background, my master's degree. I got it in engineering economic systems at Stanford. It's now management sciences and engineering. And what I was looking at the time, and a lot of others in the program working at, were to be business consultants. So we studied economics and then some mathematical ways of helping make decisions, optimization. So sort of a highly technical business degree in some ways. We also looked at this, how people make decisions, decision analysis to help businesses make decisions. And so one of the things that I did, many of us did, was went to the psychology department, took a class with Amos Tversky, who's a famous psychologist, so that we could better understand how people make decisions and mistakes that people make in what they're thinking. I remember a paper that he did about the hot hand, and basketball players don't really know although I still don't know if I agree with that. But that's all part of helping to make better decisions, and it should help us to better understand. We want to know the policies that we put in place also. How are people going to react to that? And that takes better understanding of human behavior, and it's best to have as much of an objective view of that as possible. And I think that's where the NSF comes in, and there's a lot of great research done by other organizations. But some of that is agenda-driven. Much of that is agenda-driven, and that's what we're trying to get away from with the NSF. And I think NSF has done a very good job with that, and doesn't mean that there aren't issues that do come up. I think NSF has done a good job of dealing with a lot of those. But as I said before, I think it's our role here, and I know the chairman agrees with this, to take a look at this. And so I thank the chairman for this hearing. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lipinski. Any other member? Well, I see there's only one now. Mr. Clark, do you want a second round? All right. Chair recognizes Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a statement, and I welcome any comments on this. A couple days ago, I happened to meet with the CEO of Ford Motor Company. And the reason why I mention this is because the auto industry is ruthlessly competitive. And Mr. Mullally shared with other freshman members of Congress how he was able to, he and his management team was able to turn Ford Motor Company around. You know, the bottom line is very different in a corporate company. You know, here in this country, as the other side likes to underscore, we can borrow money to spend more than we receive in revenues. However, Ford did a couple things. They dramatically reduced their costs by streamlining their operations. But also, and to paraphrase Mr. Mullally, Ford could not succeed by cutting alone. At the same time, they heavily invested in safety engineering, in fuel efficiency. When it comes to the federal budget, we know why we're spending too much money. We know what the main driver of our debt and deficit is. And I'll tell you one thing, it's not SBE research, it's healthcare costs because of demographics, because of the increasing rise of the rate of the cost of medical technology, because we don't coordinate care, especially when we're treating those who are chronically ill. Essentially, it's this. It's because our health care system really is a system of disease management, and it doesn't promote wellness. Your research into health care will help transform the incentives right now that we're using to compensate health providers. What you're doing is actually helping us bring down our debt and deficit. And I wanted to underscore that fact, and I welcome any of you who disagree with this. But, you know, the bottom line point is this. I know the subcommittee chair and the chair, they talked about their academic backgrounds. Let me tell you about mine. I'm trained as a visual artist, as a painter. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in painting. May not lend me to an obvious understanding and appreciation of your line of work, but I'll tell you what does. I'm a son of a man who risked everything to come to this country. He was an immigrant, just like many of your ancestors. He came here willingly, though. My mother's people, they were brought here against their will from Africa. But needless to say, this country is extraordinary, and it's not because we do things on the cheap. It's because we recognize the value of contributions from diverse sources from around the world. And we give them, in the preamble of our Declaration of Independence, the God-given right to liberty, to be able to express our views. Now, we're not the unchallenged superpower of the world. China's right there. They understand the value of investing in research, and they're doing that heavily. But here's something what we do have different as a democracy. Because we value liberty and we value individual freedom, your work, our funding of your work is absolutely essential. We've got to promote the intellectual capacity and growth of this country. That's why we're great. We can't cut back right now. We've got to do more of that. We've got these countries all around the world who are competing, but we're the only one, in my opinion, that has a true, vibrant democracy. I just don't want you to feel apologetic for asking for funding. You're helping to ensure the American dream. I welcome any comments.
Well, as an immigrant myself, I would say this is my, adopted country. I'm an immigrant myself. I received my citizenship in 1987, and I say this is a wonderful country. This is the land of promise. But it's not because of government spending. It's because of the opportunities individuals have. And I've been very fortunate to get grants for my research from the Kauffman Foundation, the Pew Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the SOAR Foundation. In my field, economics, it's not just corporations that fund research. There's Federal Reserve banks. There's foundations. And I think, better uses for government funds than the funding of SBE research, which isn't to say that it is not good research. It's great research, it's objective, but just because, for example, a Cadillac is a good product, it doesn't mean the federal government should be buying Cadillacs for everybody. It's a question of what's the role of the government and what's the role of the private sector.
The gentleman's time has expired, but if he would like an extra amount of time to respond, that'd be fine. Otherwise, we'll move to Mr. Tonko.
Well, you know, I just want to say, I mean, throughout our history, we have supported private enterprise in terms of, even though we were the first at flight, when France looked like that they were going to really take over the airplane industry, we helped, you know, subsidize air mail routes. The semiconductor industry, it was because of the military support of that industry that we've been able to grow and innovate. No, I make no apologies. Look, we are great because we bring our tax dollars together to support our people, to support our intellectual capacity. We shouldn't shirk that responsibility, and we shouldn't be ashamed of that. That's what's made this country strong. Look, I understand we have the right to disagree on this issue. This is the taxpayers' money. When we leverage it right, when we're efficient, we can actually make a difference in the world, and that's what you're doing every day. I just don't want us to leave this committee meeting with the role that the only way that America can make it is that we have to do it on the cheap. They have to cut. No, government has a vital role in our society. And, you know, Mr. Chair, I think I've really said enough here. These people are doing outstanding research. Their research is not the cause of our debt and deficit. Actually, it's going to help bring down our overspending in health care and help better secure our people here in terms of our national security goals and interests.
Mr. Clark, thank you for your passionate remarks. The chair next recognizes Mr. Tonko. I don't know if you're familiar with where we are. We're on our second round, but it's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I apologize for joining you in late in progress, but it's one of those days of many conflicts going. To our panelists, thank you for presenting this morning. Let me share with you a thought. I worry that political attacks on scientific research send a chilling message to young, aspiring scientists. As an engineer, there was a lot of encouragement in my day and age when I was in high school to look at engineering and science because of the global race on space. But lately, there are some chilling messages that impact young, aspiring scientists, I believe, including some of the potentially best and brightest. For example, those who developed the spectrum auction methodology or geographic information systems. Just your thoughts on that. Do you share that type of concern, or do you think that we're moving along quite well? Dr. Gutmann?
So I'll just say a word or two, and then perhaps see if Dr. Elfenbein wants to contribute something, since she's at the moment closer to the community, in the research community, than I am right now. I think that there's always in my, I've been getting grants. I came out, I'm still a university faculty member. I'm on leave and assigned to the university, to NSF. I've been getting grants for 30 years now, and my experience as a researcher is that my colleagues take very seriously the message that they get from funding agencies and from the public officials more broadly, and that the pace of entry into scientific fields and the level at which people try to dream up new ideas is definitely responsive to the public messages that people get. And so I would be concerned about that. I think we see a flow when there's encouragement. We see a flow of more proposals. We see a flow of more ideas. People are dreaming up new things. And what we see is especially the notion in the support we have for our youngest scholars, which is where, in my view, as an older guy, the real future lies. We really want to go. It often isn't very expensive to make those small awards that we make to support dissertations, or our famous career awards, or graduate research fellowships, which I think Mr. Lipinski was a recipient of in the beginning of his career. It doesn't take very much to do that, but we send a message by doing those things that encourages people to have the kind of big ideas that down the road lead to important contributions to our society.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Elfenbein?
Thank you. I do feel our funding priorities send clear messages to young people who are considering careers in science. I finished my undergraduate degrees in physics and Sanskrit, actually, at the time that the superconductor super collider project was canceled, and saw many classmates rip up their PhD applications in physics. Now, clearly priorities change, and we can't help those changing priorities, but I think what's especially chilling is when we send a message to scientists that there can be political review of their work, because I think that leads to censorship. And in my own case, the idea that I was doing work that the military had taken an interest in, and that it was singled out as potentially worthy of being defunded because of some kind of view from the outside that didn't take into consideration the work's potential relevance, I think was chilling, and is chilling to those who seek federal funding. And I think there's a...
Let me just interrupt you. Was that in the 2007 action on the floor with the amendment?
It was.
What was the lesson learned coming out of that experience?
Well, for me, the lesson learned, I think, was to pay a lot more attention to the titles of grants. I think that the lesson learned, I think, for the member who made that proposal was maybe read the abstract as well. I would have to defer to him. I think, though, actually, for me, the lesson along the lines of titles is that I think that scientists do need to learn how to communicate more clearly to the public and to the taxpayers who fund our work, and to express not only our gratefulness, but to help them to see the work. And we know our work, and we, I think, need to learn how to take a perspective of looking at it as if from the outside, to understand how it's seen from the outside, so that we can explain it from the inside out. But I think it's particularly chilling to me if we are sending messages about the value of science and the value of research, because I see our university, our basic research-based university system as one of the jewels of the United States. We enjoy a lot of prosperity that is hard to put into dollar terms, because the best from all over the world want to come and be a part of our university system. You can look at how many world leaders have U.S. university degrees, how many world leaders send their children, how many people send their children, send the best people in their communities to the U.S. for degrees, and it's because of our university system. But it has not only financial impact, it has a huge diplomatic benefit to us as we think about the relationships we have with countries all over the world that have this cultural connection to the U.S. through our university system.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
The subject of the hearing was funding in the social and behavioral sciences, and that's what my testimony is about. If it were the physical and life sciences, my testimony would be very different. I think we need such funding to keep it competitive. I would also say that this funding should go to either U.S. citizens or people who intend to stay here. We shouldn't be funding, as we are now, even physical degrees in the physics and life sciences for people who then go abroad and go back to their countries and compete against us. But we definitely do need more funding in the physical and life sciences.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tonko. I'd like to thank Dr. Gutmann, Dr. Elfenbein, Dr. Wood, and Ms. Furchtgott-Roth for your testimony today, and the members for their questions. The members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional comments from the members. The witnesses are excused, and this hearing is adjourned.
No, that's funny. I got an email from the contact saying that you actually had it and you were okay with it.